Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we will begin in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1. And Moses called all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your hearing today, that you may learn them and be careful to observe them. So once again, Moses is calling all the congregation and saying, Hear, O Israel. Listen, O Israel. Hearken, O Israel. Don't just listen to the words. Truly listen to me. Listen and understand everything I'm telling you. That way you can learn what I'm telling you and be careful to observe what I'm telling you to do. See, we read God's word, and that's what unbelievers will so often find themselves doing is, I read the Bible. It's like you may have read the words, but you didn't heed them. You didn't listen to them. You didn't hear them speak back to you. You didn't observe them. Your heart isn't turned towards the Lord because you just read words as if it's a different kind of document. Moses is telling the Israelites, listen, this is not just conversation. These are the words of the Lord your God. These are the statutes and judgments which he is speaking to you, that he wishes for you to obey, so it can go well for you, so you can honor him and be blessed in abundance by him. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, those who are here today, all of us who are alive. The Lord talked with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up the mountain. He said, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So, speaking about the time at Mount Sinai in Horeb, that the Lord spoke to them face to face from the fire, that formless voice speaking out for them that they were terrified of. But he's making a point. The Lord wasn't speaking just to your fathers. He was speaking to all who stand here today. Everyone who is alive and everyone going forward and continuing to be his child, continuing your generations. He was speaking to all of you. These statutes and judgments didn't pass away with your fathers in the wilderness. They continue to this day. Everything he said continues until the fulfillment comes in Christ. Our new covenant supersedes the old. But for this old covenant believing Israelites, that every consecutive generation, this was being spoken to them as well. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. People will look at this. We spoke about this before when we went through Exodus. We'll look at this and say, see, the iniquity is carried on from father to child because God has cursed them. God will go on to also say, everyone is responsible for their own relationship with the Lord. Everyone's responsible for their own relationship. Just because I'm a bad person doesn't mean that gets passed down to my child. My sin doesn't go on to my child. By the Lord. My sin goes on to my child by me. See, when I'm visiting iniquity, when I'm living in horrible sin and raising my child around that sin, my child begins to internalize that sin and begins to reflect my sin instead of the righteousness of God. And it becomes very difficult for my child to pull out of that sin and walk in the way of the Lord. And then they go and have children. And their iniquity is shown before their children. And their children also begin to internalize that iniquity and that sin. And what happens is it tends to go less and less with each one, because my child will realize my father did a lot of bad things. I shouldn't do those things, but I'll keep some of my bad, not all of it. Then the third generation, my grandchild, will realize the problems me and my son had, me and my child had, and filter out more of that, but we'll still keep some of it. And on to the fourth generation, before it is finally pushed out as a generational curse, so to speak, where my sin has been taken on by my children. And if you don't believe me, look at your children. Take a good look at your biggest flaws and watch them be reflected in your children. You yell a lot, you'll have a child who yells a lot, because they look at you and they believe that's what they're to do. And you can keep trying to tell them, no, that's not the way you're supposed to be. But they're reflecting you and you're yelling. You have certain tics you do with your hands or certain speech patterns. You'll notice your children will pick them up. And then you'll see your grandchildren pick them up to an extent. God isn't cursing these people. He's telling them this is what's going to happen. Because you lived in iniquity, your children are going to end up living in iniquity too. Because we know God is merciful to forgive even my iniquity. So of course he's going to be merciful to forgive my children's iniquity and not curse them for my failings. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So going with both of these, the last two, and we know he doesn't account iniquity onto the children, because it says he did not slaughter the children of Korah, who rebelled against Moses and Aaron and tried to take their leadership role in standing in iniquity before God. He didn't punish his children. He still had mercy on those children. Now, I'm sure those children probably grew up with their own issues, maybe reflecting some of their own father's wickedness. But the Lord didn't punish them and set them apart because of that. Even though Korah did do this very next verse. He did take the Lord, the God, name of the Lord your God in vain. Because he made it empty. That's what vanity is. It's making something empty. People believe this is just cursing, but it's not just cursing. It is you taking the name of God and making it empty in front of others, which is actually what Moses did. He made the name of the Lord in vain. He made it empty when he struck that rock twice, instead of honoring the Lord before the congregation. He showed the God to be empty, even if only for a minute. And he was not going to hold Moses guiltless over it, no matter how loyal he was. His failing was going to be punished. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. And it's sad that the Lord feels he needs to put that in there, because the wickedness of the human heart will look for a loophole any chance they get. and say, "Oh no, Lord, I'm keeping the Sabbath. I'm not working." Meanwhile, your servants are doing all their work. No, they need to rest the same as you. Keep the Sabbath holy. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your Lord and honor your mother and your father as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long, and that it may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Honoring your mother and father had to do with not just obeying them, but as they grew older and needed to be cared for, that you would care for them as they cared for you as a child. And it would happen during Jesus' time, where he would be speaking about the Pharisees and he would be speaking out against them, because what was happening was they were allowing people to not have to honor their mother and father by pledging their wealth to the temple, but allowing them to keep it. But since it was pledged to the temple, it wasn't theirs to give to their mother and father, as long as they tied the little extra to the Pharisees. They allowed them to technically keep the law, which was the issue with the Pharisees at the time that Jesus would call out and call them whitewashed tombs. You pretend to do these things, but inside you are dead, because you are not keeping the law anyway. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And this is a commandment that sometimes we fall into unexpectedly, because we think it means coveting the exact item that they have. But it can often be that we are falling into envy for what they have. And even if we go out and buy it ourselves, our own, not steal from them, but that we're coveting what they have. And we need that for ourselves. Your neighbor buys a brand new truck, and now you begin to covet that truck because you have this old beat up vehicle. So now you go out and you take out debt to go purchase a brand new truck as well, placing yourself in debt at a detriment because you coveted their belonging. You didn't need what they had, but you wanted it so greatly. You desired it so greatly because they had something better than you, and you needed to equal the playing field. It's not always wanting to steal what they have for yourself. You can get it lawfully. But if it's an unhealthy desire to have what they have, you are coveting what they have. These words the Lord spoke to all your assembly in the mountain from the midst of the fire, the cloud, and the thick darkness, with a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. Remember, the first time these were given, they were vocal from God, and everybody agreed to them. And then Moses went up the mountain by himself because they cried out in fear. And then they turned to idolatry after they agreed not to be idolatrous. And then Moses came down and broke the 2 stone tablets and had to go back up again. So it was, when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. And you said, surely the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard the voice, or his voice from the midst of the fire. We have seen this day that God speaks with man, yet he still lives. Now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any more. Then we shall die. So they were terrified that even though they heard the voice of God and lived, they were terrified that that would not continue. That at some point this great fire would consume them. They were terrified and had really a healthy fear of the Lord. As Jesus would say, don't fear the man who can take your life. Fear the Lord who can take your life and condemn your soul. That's what they were afraid of. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living God speaking from the midst of the fire as we have and lived? Because they had never heard of anyone who heard the voice of the Lord and lived. They had never experienced that. You had Abraham, but Abraham was well in the past, was 400 years in the past. And that Abraham hadn't spoke of this great fire in front of him, this consuming fire across an entire mountain. Who had heard from something like that and survived? No one. So why would we believe we'd survive? That's what they were saying to Moses. But the thing is that this is what the Lord had for them. They were a special chosen people, the likes of which would never be seen again. You go near and hear all that the Lord our God might say, and tell us all that the Lord our God says to you, and we will hear and do it. Saying, you go be our representative, and we will listen to you, and we will do as you say, because we know what you say comes from the Lord. And we know that didn't always turn out that well either. Then the Lord heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people, which they have spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. Oh, that they have such a heart in them that they would fear me and always keep my commandments, that it might be well with them and with their children forever. So he's not so much saying, no, they're right, I'm going to consume them. But he's saying what they're spoken is right in that they are good to fear me. They are good to fear and keep my commandments. That we have a healthy fear of the Lord. It's fallen out of common parlance. But it used to be that you would ask whether somebody was a God-fearing person. Now we say, hey, do you follow Christ? Are you a Christian? Before it was, are you a God-fearing man? Are you a God-fearing woman? Because it's all in wonder as well as fear. Do you have that awe and wonder for the fearsome power and glory and might of the Lord? Because he is mighty and he is to be feared. Our eternal judgment rests on him, and he gave us a way out of it. So we should be fearful enough to run to that path, run to Christ, submit ourselves to him, and understand by only through him shall we have salvation. Only through him will we be judged by righteous ways, because we are not righteous of ourselves, only when we are cloaked in the blood of Christ. Go and say to them, return to your tents. But as for you, stand here by me, and I will speak to you all the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which you shall teach them, that they may observe them in the land which I am giving them to possess. Therefore you shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. All of these things were for their benefit, and to understand that as hard as it seems to keep these laws and these commandments and these statutes, while you were standing in this congregation of 2-3 million people, but you are all in one group now, one group with the Lord at the center. When you get dispersed throughout the promised land, it's going to be that much harder to walk in the ways of the Lord. When you start seeing the blessing, when you start seeing the abundance, you will start thinking it is from your hand it's come. And if you don't follow these statutes, if you don't continue to tell your children or your grandchildren, you will fall into sin. You will fall into idolatry. You will place everything else above God. And your days will not be prolonged. It will not go well for you. Because you will have forgotten the most important things that you have in this life. And that is the Lord in the midst of you. His provision and his blessings. So moving on to chapter 6. Now this is the commandment, and these are the statutes and judgments which the Lord your God has commanded to teach you, that you may observe them in the land which you are crossing over to possess, that you may fear the Lord your God, to keep his statutes, his commandments which I command you, you and your son and your grandson, all the days of your life, that your days may be prolonged, so that their days in the land will be prolonged, so they will have generational wealth, generational land, generational inheritance. Keep the commands of the Lord, so that they'll have what is most important, the Lord. Therefore hear, O Israel, and be careful to observe it, that it may be well with you, and that you may multiply greatly as the Lord God of your fathers has promised you, a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. The Shema, the two verses that the Jews would keep with them always. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, the only one, is what that's saying. The triune God is one God, but it's saying that the Lord is the only God. There is not more than one God. There are no other gods. He is the only God, period. You shall love the Lord your God with all your strength, with all your soul, and with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. I normally say that reversed. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. With everything you have in you, you will love the Lord. Because that's how he loves you. So that's the way you will love him back. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You know, it became commonplace in Jesus' time where they would keep the Shema written on their wrist, on a little scroll, or on a phylactery on their head. But this shall be frontlets between your eyes. He will say this again and again in Deuteronomy. It is not a literal thing. It means that everywhere you look, you understand that it is because of the Lord. That you know that in everything you do, it is because of the Lord. And everything you see is because of the Lord. In every provision you have is because of the Lord. And every blessing you have, every work you do, everything is because of the Lord. Now they do and still do have them written on their doorposts and on their house and on their gates. And it's a great sign. But notice when he's talking about diligently teaching your children, he doesn't say, in the synagogue, your children will learn. In the Sunday school, your children will learn. In that hour a week, 2 hours a week if you go to midweek, your children will learn. But you will diligently teach your children, not through lecturing, but you'll talk of them. Your conversations will be of the Lord. When you're walking with your children, you will point out the beauty of the Lord's creation. You will speak of the Lord and honor the Lord in that. When you lie down your child, you will pray over them and show them the wonder of the Lord there. And when you rise up, the first things out of your mouth should be blessings to the Lord. That everything you do should be praise and blessing and worship to the Lord. To raise your children as a reflection, not through word only, but by deed, so they reflect that as the blessing to the 1,000th generation, as he said in the Ten Commandments. So it shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you large and beautiful cities, which you did not build, houses full of good things which you did not fill. hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, when you have eaten and are full. So he's saying, when the Lord your God brings you into all these places, I'm going to caution you about being disobedient now. Because when you come into this land, and you're in these large, beautiful walled cities that you didn't build, that were prepared before you, as I awaited their iniquity to come to its fullness, and would bring you out to conquer them. As you now have these wells that you're not going to have to dig, these vineyards, these olive trees, these farms that you're now going to have pre-made for you in these lands you conquer. And when you've eaten, and when you're filled, and when you're blessed, then beware. In your comfort and in your complacency, then beware, lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. You shall fear the Lord your God and serve him, and shall take oaths in his name. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are all around you. For the Lord your God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord your God be aroused against you and destroy you from the face of the earth. Beware in your blessings that you don't forget the Lord who gave you these blessings, brought you to this place. Because all these people that you're going to conquer, all these people in the surrounding nations, because you're going to go through them gradually, you're going to see them giving credit to this Baal, and this Baal, and this Baal. These foreign gods. Oh, that's the God of the harvest. Look at how bountiful our harvest is. Their harvest is really bountiful. Maybe while I'm praising the Lord, maybe I should throw a quick prayer to their Baal. That way the harvest is good for me too. Because if you don't beware, the anger of the Lord comes. And it's a righteous and just anger. Because for all he has provided, you should be honoring him and him alone. You shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him in Massah. And that is the verse that the Lord, our Lord Jesus Christ, used against Satan in the wilderness. Throw yourself off. It's said that the angels would not even allow you to bang your foot against the stone, your toes. Said, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Because Jesus most often quoted from Deuteronomy. Jesus' most quoted book is Deuteronomy. But he said, you shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him in Massah, at the place of bitterness, at the place of strife. You shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, his testimonies, his statutes, which he has commanded you, and you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, that you may go in and possess the good land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to cast out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has spoken. Do as he commanded. I mentioned it before a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple weeks ago at this point. I was watching VeggieTales, which I had never watched before. But my son was sick and we were watching it through. And he came across one with Gideon. And Gideon trusts the angel, believes the angel, not scared of the angel. But when the angel tells him that he's now going to have to lead an army for God, he said, oh, hold on a minute. He's like, wait a minute, you believed everything else, but you don't believe I'm coming with words of God? He said, well, I thought you were just coming to encourage me, tell me, well done, good and faithful servant. Angel said, well, if you expect to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, you have to do what the Lord is asking you to do. You have to do what he commanded you to do before he tells you you did a good job. And that's what this continuously is repeated in Deuteronomy. Do as the Lord commanded. Do what is right in the sight of the Lord, so it will go well for you. You want the Lord to bless you? Do what he's asking you to do so he can bless you. Do what is right. Cast out the enemies before you. Don't let them be a hindrance and a thorn to you. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, "What is the meaning of the testimonies, the statutes, the judgments, which the Lord our God has commanded you?" Then you shall say to your son, "We were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and the Lord showed signs and wonders before our eyes, great and severe, against Egypt, Pharaoh and all his household. Then he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in to give us the land of which he swore to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our God always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. Then it will be righteous for us if we are careful to observe these commandments before the Lord our God, as he commanded us. You want the blessings. You want the righteousness. You have to submit yourself under the authority of God and do as he commands. We live under a new covenant. This is the old covenant. We live under a new covenant of grace, a new covenant where we follow Jesus Christ, where we follow our King of Kings and our Lord of Lords. But if we want it to be righteous for us, we have to follow his commands. Because what good is an army that doesn't follow the king? If we're submitting ourselves under the authority of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, we need to do as commanded by that king. He has already given us and commanded us a great many things to do. And it's hard enough to do those. But to each of us, he will speak into our lives and give us commands and tell us what he expects from us, what he expects us to do with our gifts and our talents. And when he tells us what to do, he expects us to go forth and do those things. We are expected to go and do as he commands and go where he leads. If we say he is our king, then we need to do as he commands. Because as a soldier, as one under his authority, we have no right to deny his command. We must do as he says, so that it will be right for us, so we will be blessed, so he can lead us and help us to conquer the things he would have us conquer. All things for our good. All. But only if we follow the commands of the one who we claim is over us. The one we claim to follow. The one we call ourselves by. In Christian, we call ourselves a little Christ. We call ourselves his. Then we need to act as his and do as he wishes. That is where we shall end it for this morning. I hope this was fruitful for you. Hope to see you again next time. But until then, be blessed.